it's no secret that I am not a fan of perfectionism. Perfectionism tends to be the underlying cause of a lot of the ongoing challenges that we face as women, as moms, as wives and bosses, and even as friends. Perfectionism, it pretends to be an asset that gives us an edge over the competition, but really, it turns us into our own worst enemy, causing us to sabotage ourselves over and over again. But you want to know what really grinds my gears? It's how perfectionism, paired up with any other challenge, makes everything worse. In today's episode, I want to talk about something that I've never discussed before on this show, and that is the invisible load. We're going to talk about what it is, what it looks like, how it affects us, and what happens when perfectionism and the invisible load collide. Ready? Let's go. Welcome back to episode 92 of the Life Edit Project podcast. As always, I'm your favorite life coach and podcast host, Coach Elizabeth, and I'm really excited. I'm all geeked up about today's episode. It's a juicy topic, and I cannot wait to dig in. But first, I want to give you two quick reminders. Number one, if you've got a burning question for me, I'm all ears. I want to hear from you. You can ask me anything and get my response right here on a future episode of the show. All you have to do is follow the link that's in the show notes to fill out a quick form. And don't worry, you can stay as anonymous as you want to be so that your business ain't out on Front Street. Whether you want to offer a suggestion for a topic for me to discuss here on the show, or maybe you want me to weigh in on a very specific challenge or problem that you're dealing with. Either way, you can drop me a line and ask me anything. Number two, if you like this podcast, if you're a fan, the best way that you can show your support is to leave a 5-star rating and review, either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Reviews help new listeners find the show, and they let those new listeners know that there are gems to be had around here. Plus, people who leave a 5-star rating and review, they get to be my listener bays. And all of my listener bays get a personal shout out from me on the show. So if that sounds like something you want, all the info that you need is on my website at lifeeditproject.com/podcast. And you can even stream the latest episodes of the show directly from that webpage. So go ahead and check that out. Okay, that's all the reminders that I have for you. Let's talk about the invisible load. But first, you know the drill. I gotta set the scene before we dive into the deep end of this topic. What the heck is the invisible load? What does that phrase even mean? Well, it's time for a Coach Elizabeth definition, which is something that you will find in absolutely nobody's dictionary because it is a definition that I made up. And I make up these definitions, not because there aren't other definitions out there, but because I think that the definitions that are out there are insufficient and they do not actually convey what I'm trying to communicate. So I take my own stab at it. So here we go. If you're taking notes, this is what you can write down. The invisible load is the unacknowledged but meaningful mental, emotional, and logistical labor that goes into completing a task or fulfilling a role. I know, that's a whole mouthful. I'll say it again. The invisible load is the unacknowledged but meaningful mental, emotional, and logistical labor that goes into completing a task or fulfilling a role. Now, as we discuss the invisible load, there are a few things that I want you to keep in mind. First is that, obviously, it is invisible. That means we can't see it. We are oblivious to it. And that includes both the people who are doing the work and the people who are benefiting from the work. The invisible load is invisible to all parties. And because we cannot see the work, because it is invisible to us, it also means that we don't really appreciate it. We take it for granted that this type of labor will get done, and no one ever really acknowledges it. And that also means that no one says thank you for it. The invisible load is thankless work. And I'm going to just say this, thankless work is always the hard kind of work to do, right? Every type of task or job that you have to do, it's always easier when you feel like the work that you're doing is valued and appreciated. Another thing to keep in mind about the invisible load, because we can't see it and because we tend to take it for granted, this type of labor is also under-resourced. That means we generally don't have the time or the mental capacity or the emotional bandwidth to approach this work the way we would if we actually knew that it was there and we knew what we were dealing with. To bring all of this home, to put this into context, let me give you a real life example from my own life because, I ain't afraid to talk about my own life, right? So the first example that comes to mind for me is cooking dinner. My husband, he makes a mean breakfast, right? Can't nobody make an omelet like my husband. But dinner, y'all, is not his ministry. And so that means that I cook most of the dinners in my household. Now, this is not a problem. I enjoy cooking. I'm pretty good at it. I can throw down in the kitchen. And around here, we all like to eat good food. So we're all happy with me cooking most of the dinner. But when my husband asks me if I'm cooking dinner tonight, what he wants to know is if I'm turning uncooked food into a meal that we can eat by throwing it in some pan, seasoning it up, and, turning it into something that is greater than the sum of its parts, right? But before I can cook the food that he's talking about, someone needs to have decided what's on the menu, someone needs to have gone shopping for the food and all the ingredients, and someone needs to make sure that the pantry and the seasoning racks are all stocked with all the fixings. Because I'm cooking, I also have to make sure that I start cooking early enough so that dinner is ready before my kid needs to go to bed, right? Like dinner has to be ready at dinner time. And given my schedule, that means that cooking is a planned activity and not a spontaneous one. All of that planning and shopping is part of the invisible logistical labor that has to happen before I can actually complete the task of cooking a meal. And all of that planning and all of those logistics means that I am making a lot more decisions. And decisions are not free. Decisions require mental capacity, and our brains can only make a finite number of good decisions on any given day. So all of that work is invisible mental labor that I take on because I am the one who is completing the task of cooking dinner. But then, y'all, cooking dinner also comes with an invisible emotional labor. There's the angst of trying a new recipe and hoping that my family likes it. Or there's the disappointment of messing up a meal that I've cooked 1,000 times, but for some reason things went wrong. And then hearing that the thing that I poured all of my energy into making isn't good. Or it's the emotional weight of hearing my family say, "Oh, we're having chicken again," but no one offering suggestions on what they'd rather eat instead, right? All of that is emotional labor, and it's emotional labor that only impacts me. I'm the only one that bears the weight of this mental, emotional, and logistical labor. My husband and my daughter, they don't see it. They don't appreciate it, and they don't consider all of the pre-work that I have to do before I actually put the food in the pans to cook it up. Okay, now I'm going to admit, I'm exaggerating here a little bit because we're not quite this oblivious in my household. But that's just because I have worked really hard at making my own invisible load more visible to my family and more visible to myself, because you cannot solve for a problem that you don't even know that you have. But another reason I wanted to talk about the invisible load today is because it's something that disproportionately impacts women and girls. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you are a woman or if you are socialized as a woman in this society, the invisible load is going to impact you more than it's going to impact your male counterpart. And the invisible load shows up for women in a variety of positions and roles in life and in society, and it can show up in any area of your life. So, for example, in marriage or other romantic relationships, the invisible load might look like planning dates or vacations or organizing things around the house, and yes, cooking and cleaning. If you're a mom, the invisible load comes into play a lot when it comes to childcare or to the schooling of your child, right? With checking schoolwork and making sure that your child is signed up for all of those extracurricular activities. And even if you are a woman with a career, if you are a woman who is working, the invisible load shows up in your professional life as well. So women are more likely to work in helping professions and helping industries. So these are careers like teaching, social work, nursing, administrative positions, HR, counseling, and even nonprofit work. All of these are industries that are built around catering to the needs of other people, and these industries are overwhelmingly run by women. So the invisible load shows up everywhere. We don't escape it at work, we don't escape it at home, right? And if you are a Black woman, the invisible load is even heavier for you. And that's because we're often fighting harder for our work to be visible and for our work to be valued and appreciated. And even when we're trying to do the same type of work as non-Black women and non-women of color, we're often fighting a different kind of battle and dealing with challenges that just do not apply to other populations in our society. But no matter who you are, the invisible load is heavy. And part of why it's so heavy is because we just are not set up to carry the burden because we don't realize how much work there is. The invisible load is invisible to us, and so we don't plan for it. But here's the other thing that I want you to know. Perfectionism makes the invisible load even heavier and harder to bear. How? Because it adds more layers to the mental, emotional, and logistical labor that we take on during everyday life and even as we're working towards our big life goals. Think about this with me. Let's say your perfectionism personality is the planner. That means you will end up spending more time and energy doing things like researching, making contingency plans, and preparing for any foreseeable outcome than someone who isn't operating from a perfectionist mindset. You're literally opting into more mental and logistical labor. But let's say you have the projector perfectionism personality, then you're going to be real concerned with presenting an image of having your act together and being unbothered by the work, even when you're drowning under the weight of it. So you're going to end up stuffing down a lot of inconvenient and unpleasant emotions. And you will end up having to do a lot of additional emotional labor to maintain whatever perfect image it is that you're trying to keep. So no matter how perfectionism tends to show up for you, it's going to add layers to your invisible load by ratcheting up your anxiety, creating shame, and making it harder for you to both ask for and accept the help and support that you need to do what you're trying to do. And sometimes I feel like a broken record because I'm always here telling y'all that perfectionism is a trap, but it is, so I'm going to keep saying it. And we fall into the trap of perfectionism because we think that being more perfect or executing more perfectly will help us get what we want out of life. But the truth is that perfectionism actually makes it harder for us to both create the life that we want and to enjoy it when we do. But I don't believe that life has to be hard for it to be worthwhile. I want to help you reach your goals without hating success. And I want to help you help the people that you care about without sacrificing your own well-being. And the best way that I can help you is through my one-on-one coaching services. My calendar is open and I'm accepting new clients. So if you want to explore how much easier your life can be when you lighten your invisible load and ditch perfectionism, tap the link that is in the show notes to book a call with me and get on my calendar. Let's get started. We ain't got no time to waste, y'all. Okay, that is all I've got for you today. I will be back in your ears next week with another juicy episode. In the meantime, practice naming all the mental, emotional, and logistical labor that you put into everything that's on the plate. It is so much easier to figure out what you want to remove when you can actually see what's there. All right? Peace.